The man was shocked at night to find his beloved woman obsessively licking fresh blood from a corpse. Disbelief filled his face as he never expected his lover to be a monstrous creature that preyed on humans. His name was Kuro. To escape his enemies, he and his servant Benki fled into the remote wilderness. Unexpectedly, they found someone living in solitude there. Following a light, they came upon a strange courtyard. Exhausted from days of fleeing, they decided to stay the night. As soon as they entered the house, Benkei loudly called for the owner. To their surprise, a stunningly beautiful young woman appeared from the darkness. After a brief moment of awe, Benkei explained their situation, while Kuro couldn't take his eyes off the woman. He knew he had fallen deeply in love at first sight. Suddenly, Kuro felt an intense dizziness and painfully knelt down. The woman quickly came over and gently placed her hand on Kuro's forehead. As expected, Kuro had a high fever. Unbeknownst to him, his noble demeanor had also captured the woman's heart. She agreed to their request to stay. She had only one rule. At the end of the corridor was her chamber, and they were warned never to peek inside, no matter what. Kuro also learned the woman's name was Kuromitsu. Unexpectedly, by the next morning, Kuro's fever had worsened and he had fallen into a coma. Benkei, disregarding the threat of their pursuers, had no choice but to go down the mountain to buy medicine. During this time, Kuro was left in Kuromitsu's care. As Benkei descended, his mind grew more troubled with each step. He saw a blood-stained Buddha statue missing its head and arms, a gloomy and overcast sky, and a dangerously beautiful sea of red spider lilies. He stood frozen, realizing they had stumbled into a formidable place. Benkei had been away for several days. Meanwhile, Kuromitsu had been diligently caring for Kuro. The constant company of just the two, a man and a woman, inevitably led to the blossoming of feelings between them, already predisposed to affection. However, just as their emotions became uncontrollable, Kuromitsu pushed the man away at a critical moment. She spoke words Kuro could not understand, indicating that no matter how much they loved each other, they were doomed never to be together. At night, Kuro suddenly awoke from his sleep. Accustomed to living on the edge of life and death, he sensed an unfamiliar presence. Concerned for Kuromitsu's safety, he ignored her earlier warning and found himself outside her room. There, he unintentionally discovered Kuromitsu's hidden secret. Kuromitsu, caught off guard, looked panicked, fearing Kuro would despise her as a filthy monster. However, aside from initial confusion, Kuro showed no disgust and even promised to keep her secret. But before he could finish speaking, he was shocked to see a man had silently appeared behind Kuromitsu. This sudden change startled Kuro, but his distraction allowed another assassin to exploit the opening and strike him down. Immediately, a barrage of flaming arrows rained down, and in moments, the house was engulfed in flames. At first, Kuro thought he had brought this upon Kuromitsu, but he soon realized that these intruders were actually targeting her. In a critical moment, despite his injuries, Kuro stepped forward and successfully saved Kuromitsu. However, outnumbered and severely wounded, Kuro was ultimately overpowered. Blood poured out beneath him as he lay on the ground, staring blankly at his foes, knowing everything was over. Unexpectedly, a scene defying all logic occurred. Kuromitsu, with one arm severed, had somehow appeared behind the man, her own severed arm in her mouth. Her fierce gaze and the aura she emitted were no longer human. Not far away, several mysterious figures silently watched everything unfold in the fire. Their purpose was to capture Kuromitsu, a woman of stunning beauty who possessed the legendary ability of eternal youth. Elsewhere, Kuromitsu and Kuro fled deep into the mountains. Her severed arm had miraculously healed. Relieved, Kuro knew his end was near and urged Kuromitsu to leave him behind and escape. Yet these simple words made Kuromitsu's heart, silent for many years, beat fiercely. For the first time in a millennium, she felt someone else's care. Determined, she decided to take Kuro to witness the end of time. To save Kuro, Kuromitsu decided to grant him immortality. She bared her pale neck as Kuro's teeth pierced her veins, binding their lives together. They then succumbed to a whirlpool of love. Afterward, Kuromitsu shed complex tears, grateful to have found a companion in the endless march of time, yet fearful of the eternal curse she had imposed on Kuro, questioning the fairness of her act. As Kuro began to comfort her, he was suddenly overcome by intense pain, a side effect of his new vampiric nature, which would soon pass. However, trouble struck unexpectedly when a samurai appeared and mercilessly cleaved Kuro's body, sending him rolling down a hillside, his fate unknown. The samurai then lifted Kuromitsu and impaled her against a tree trunk. The mastermind, an Onmyoji, revealed his hideous face by removing his mask. He had come for the secret of Kuromitsu's immortality, determined to extract it even if it meant disemboweling her. Just then, amidst billowing steam, Kuro, presumed dead, stood up again. His eyes empty of emotion, he witnessed his lover's plight, and a surge of rage and vitality flooded his brain. An unearthly aura swept through the area as he vowed to make these vile humans pay. At that moment, Kuro's strength far surpassed human limits, making even a powerful samurai seem no different from a toy. In an instant, all enemies were annihilated. Kuromitsu explained to Kuro that this was the power of vampire blood and that he needed to rest to fully integrate with it. However, unexpectedly, the Onmyoji was not dead and had learned that drinking Kuromitsu's blood could grant eternal life, nearly fulfilling his long-held desire. He madly charged at Kuromitsu, but a flash of red light followed, and the Onmyoji was cut in two. It was Kuro's servant Benkei, who had arrived just in time. He was ready to help them escape, but just then, Kuromitsu paused, noticing a mark on Benkei's hand identical to that of the Onmyoji's allies. Confused, Kuro asked Kuromitsu what was wrong, but before she could warn him, a blade flashed. Kuro was beheaded. As his consciousness faded, he could not understand why Benkei would kill him, feeling deep regret at being separated from his lover in life and death. After an indeterminate amount of time, a ray of sunlight pierced through the forest, and Kuro opened his eyes once again. It all seemed like a dream. Aimlessly, he began to walk, driven by a single thought: to find Kuromitsu. However, as the new scene unfolded before him, Kuro stood frozen, speechless. It was as if he had arrived centuries into the future. Kuro gazed silently at the ruins of a city made of steel and concrete. Beneath the rubble, the city still buzzed with human activity. Covered in blood, Kuro wandered the streets like an outsider. Suddenly, a young man trying to attract customers stopped him. Kuro, seeing someone addressing him, asked what this place was. The young man, annoyed, thought he had encountered a madman. At that moment, a man named Karuta, drawn by the crowd, hurried forward to dissuade Kuro, who was standing on a road sign surveying the city. Karuta informed him that the city was called Asuka. Noticing the ornate sword at Kuro's waist, Karuta began to speak, but before he could say more, Kuro turned and left. He was so preoccupied that he didn't even notice someone bumping into him. By the time he realized it, his sword was already gone. Inside the black market, numerous pickpockets were selling their spoils when a young boy approached a merchant with Kuro's sword. Just as the merchant was about to buy the sword, Kuro arrived and forcefully reclaimed it. The head of security immediately became furious and threatened to teach him a lesson. At this tense moment, Karuta suddenly appeared and diffused the situation. Surprisingly, Karuta seemed to hold a high status, and not only did the market folks back down, but they also returned the sword to Kuro and apologized. In a bar, the usually silent Kuro was captivated by a mural. Karuta then explained that the painting depicted a major disaster from centuries ago. It turned out that 24 years prior, an asteroid had struck Earth. Humanity had used nuclear weapons to shatter it, but the remnants nearly destroyed civilization. Hearing this, a strange memory suddenly surfaced in Kuro's mind. The image of him and Kuromitsu standing atop the ruins flashed before him, but in the next moment, Kuromitsu was ruthlessly shot by humans. Meanwhile, a plane hovered above the city of Asuka. A huge figure dropped straight from the cargo door to the ground, causing a massive impact. When the smoke cleared, a 5-meter-tall blue monster appeared and immediately began slaughtering the city's inhabitants. Following closely were a special combat squad, ruthlessly taking every life. They were part of the army of Red Emperor, one of the giants of the apocalypse. As people in the bar hurried to take refuge, Kuro discovered a mysterious space hidden behind the painting. Soon, Red Emperor's troops entered the bar. At that moment, Kuro noticed the soldiers bore the same mark as Benkei. Elsewhere, Karuta breathed a sigh of relief as Red Emperor's army prepared to leave the bar without finding their target. However, a scream then reached his ears as a soldier's blood sprayed out. With Kuro enveloped in murderous aura, as the assailant. With his enemies before him, he was not about to let them leave alive. Kuro activated his awakened state, and the well-equipped soldiers stood no chance, quickly falling dead before him. Just when it seemed over, an officer-like figure suddenly attacked, wielding his hand as a blade and slashing wildly at Kuro. After just a few strikes, Kuro was critically wounded and fell to the ground. The officer did not deliver a killing blow, but left with a parting goodbye. The next moment stunned Karuta. Kuro lifted a corpse, revealed his bloodthirsty fangs, and bit into it, sucking the sweet blood like a starving wolf. This woman is the hottest prostitute on the street, making countless men fall at her feet. However, today she met her match. No matter how Rai tried to seduce Kuro, the man before her remained unmoved. Though he had lost his memory, he still remembered his true love, the eternal companion who had journeyed with him through the corridors of time. Eventually, Rai, resigned, told Kuro that if he wanted to find his missing wife, he should come to the butcher shop on the street. It turned out that Rai was Karuta's companion, and she believed Kuro would come searching for Kuromitsu. Sure enough, even suspecting it might be a trap, Kuro decisively went to meet her. Introduced by Rai, Kuro then met her boss, Izana. Upon meeting Kuro, Izana got straight to the point. They were part of a resistance group called Haniwa, and hoped Kuro would join them to fight against the Red Emperor's army. After seeing Kuro effortlessly kill soldiers of the Red Emperor, Karuta had informed Izana and wanted to recruit Kuro. To increase the chances of persuading him to join, Izana took Kuro to a secret room. The moment the surroundings came into view, Kuro's expression changed dramatically, as a strange yet profound memory flooded his mind. At the beginning of the 19th century, Kuro also had no memory, as if he had woken from a long dream, remembering nothing. Fortunately, Kuromitsu was still by his side. Seeing Kuro's confusion, she told him she would reveal the truth once he was better. She then whispered something strange to him. However, trouble was inevitable. An uninvited guest had already arrived downstairs. By the time Kuromitsu handed a weapon to Kuro, the enemy was already at the door. The enemy frantically twisted the locked doorknob and, finding no success, decisively raised a machine gun and pulled the trigger without hesitation. This man not only knew Kuromitsu, but also bore the mark of the Red Emperor. In the next moment, Kuromitsu returned fire, but the man easily dodged the hot bullets. He even used his machine gun arm to block Kuro's attack, then caught Kuro's head with his foot and threw him out. Before Kuro could react, the enemy's barrage was upon him. Bullets poured down like a torrential rain, and Kuro was eventually hit. As he was about to fall, his eyes turned crimson. The next moment, the world slowed down immensely. Kuro could pluck the bullets from the air with his bare hands. He then picked up his sword, struck all the bullets in the air, and easily reached the enemy's side. The disparity in strength made the bulky man appear no different than a clown. The scenes of Kuro and Kuromitsu fleeing together felt hauntingly familiar to him. The imagery of running in the dark with his lover seemed like something he had experienced countless times. However, 20 years ago, after a meteor destroyed human civilization, they thought the pursuit would end. But that was just the beginning of the nightmare. With hidden shooters opening fire, Kuromitsu was hit and fell from a 100-meter-high building. Watching his beloved in agony, Kuro was enraged. However, the metallic storm woven from death had already begun, and he too fell into the city ruins. The last thing Kuro saw was his lover being taken away. Back in the Resistance's secret room, the sudden painful memory nearly drove Kuro mad. Izana took this moment to explain that the group that took Kuromitsu was the Red Emperor's army, who used her blood to create cyborgs. The officer from the Red Emperor's army who had defeated Kuro earlier was one of these cyborgs. Their immense power allowed them to act recklessly, so it was imperative to rescue Kuromitsu from them. However, Kuro coldly revealed that it was not the Red Emperor's army, but Izana himself, who had taken Kuromitsu that day. As Kuro was about to draw his sword to fight, a strange man appeared behind him, threatening that if Kuro did not cooperate, he would die there as a monster today. In a crucial moment, Izana intervened and agreed that meeting Kuromitsu was possible, but only with the leader's approval. He then ordered Karuta, who was hiding in the shadows, to take Kuro to meet the leader. The whole situation became increasingly complex. Whether the lovers walking through the river of time could meet again remained uncertain. Wearing a blindfold, Kuro followed Karuta to the Haniwa Resistance's headquarters. With a key inserted and a mechanism pressed, a secretive grand hall appeared before Kuro. Here, he finally saw Kuromitsu again, his eternal lover who remained stunningly beautiful through the millennia. Even the dazzling phosphorescent sea of flowers paled in her presence. Just as Kuro attempted to approach her, a whirlwind rose in the room, and phosphorescent petals obscured his vision. When Kuro opened his eyes again, everything had returned to normal. The recent vision was a test arranged by the leader, Mrs. Saniwa, to confirm Kuro's identity. Saniwa would then take Kuro back to Kuromitsu. However, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Upon receiving news from her subordinates, Saniwa's expression changed drastically. The Red Emperor's army had already breached their stronghold in Asuka City. The resistance was powerless against the assault of the cyborgs and could only emit painful screams as they were mercilessly slaughtered. Just then, a massive figure descended from the sky, revealing that the enemy had discovered this mysterious stronghold. However, they could not have anticipated that only death awaited them here. Not only was the sharpshooter Kuon present, known for his divine marksmanship, but the man called the God of War was also ready. The next moment was filled with the clash of blades, severed limbs, flying flesh, and separated corpses. Before the Red Emperor's army could react, their soldiers were embraced by the goddess of death. In the bloody scene, Kuro was fierce. Despite the desperate resistance of the Red Emperor's army, the only path left for them was death. Even the unmatched blue cyborg was sadly cleaved in half by Kuro's blade. In just a moment, all the invading Red Emperor's forces were annihilated. Meanwhile, at the Asuka base, the gunfire had ceased. A few remaining resistance members stood frozen in place as if facing a great enemy. Suddenly, a comrade was dragged into the darkness, losing his life after a flash of electricity. Then, a mass of wires sprung out, unexpectedly binding two individuals. An officer used the wires to cut open a woman's clothing, waved his hand, and merciless bullets instantly turned them into a sieve. Such events were continuously unfolding, with the remaining resistance powerless against these monsters. At this moment, Izana finally made a certain decision. He approached a device, pressed a switch, and machinery began to operate. Multiple security measures were unlocked, revealing the legendary blood of Kuromitsu, known for its immortal power. The man's body rapidly mutated, his muscles swelling grotesquely as he turned into a monstrous creature. In pursuit of power, he had injected himself with immortal blood. But how could a human body sustain divine power? His head suddenly swelled, and then his muscles rapidly expanded, transforming him into a grotesque monster in an instant. Yet the mutation did not stop there. His flesh continued to grow until, with a scream, he dissolved into a pool of blood. Izana's grisly fate was witnessed by Rai, who was hiding in the shadows. After reporting the incident to Kuro and the others, Rai hid again, waiting for rescue. The fear of death was clearly etched on her beautiful face. However, things did not go as hoped. The cyborg Arashiyama had already discovered her. Rai had no choice but to flee desperately, but she was headed towards a dead end. Arashiyama's tendrils soon reached her. At the critical moment, accompanied by a scream, a soldier was killed by Kuro, who had arrived just in time. Meanwhile, Kuon decisively fired his gun, but the bullets had no effect on Arashiyama. Then, Arashiyama smashed the ground with one hand, and dazzling electric sparks flew as countless steel tendrils burst through the soil, the force shattering the entire floor. As Arashiyama launched another attack, Kuro had to retreat temporarily. But the battle had just begun. It's unclear what Arashiyama's body was made of, but Kuro felt as though his blade struck steel. The next moment, Kuro started moving quickly, but Arashiyama was faster and instantly reached his side. With his hand transformed into a blade, he delivered a strike that flipped Kuro onto the ground. Before Kuro could catch his breath, Arashiyama's relentless attacks followed, the oppressive force feeling like a demon descended to earth. The overwhelming strength and eerie abilities left Kuro and Kuon no choice but to flee in panic. Seizing an opportunity, Kuon fired at a canister behind Arashiyama. Accompanied by a glow of phosphorescence, a massive explosion consumed everything. However, the battle was not over yet. Kuro's expression changed as he finally saw Arashiyama's true form, a cyborg demon merged with machinery. Next, Arashiyama bizarrely positioned his limbs on the ground and, with a loud shout, countless steel tendrils burst from the earth. The sheer number pinned Kuro against the wall, immobilizing him. At that moment, Kuro's blood boiled with familiar power surging into his brain. The divine authority descended upon the earth once more, and in an instant, Arashiyama was torn apart. His last spiteful retaliation did not harm Kuro at all. The difference between a counterfeit and the original was stark. Afterward, the Haniwa base was completely destroyed, and the front line suffered nearly total casualties. Everyone's faces were solemn as they prepared to embark on their journey to meet Kuromitsu, where all their questions awaited answers. Under Saniwa's leadership, Kuro and his group set out for Kuromitsu's hiding place, Kagura Village. As they delved deeper into the forest, Kuro felt increasingly strange. Everything about this place seemed familiar. At that moment, a surge of unfamiliar memories flooded his mind. The Sengoku era, the forest ablaze, Kuro and Kuromitsu standing back to back, surrounded by enemies. Kuro swung his blade, his cold edge slicing through enemies and spilling hot blood. Suddenly, a war demon descended from the sky, and with a single strike, Kuro was severed in two. Snapping back to reality, Kuro had to set these thoughts aside to continue their journey. After overcoming many difficulties, the group arrived at Kagura Village, only to find it deserted. Sensing something was terribly wrong, their fears were confirmed when they found the bodies of villagers densely packed in an underground passage. Kuromitsu was missing. The only survivor was a painter, but he was delirious, incessantly mumbling about vines. It was then discovered that all the villagers had been strangled by vines. Saniwa firmly declared that the Red Emperor's army was responsible, as they had a cyborg capable of controlling vines. Kuromitsu's disappearance was undoubtedly connected to them. With the situation urgent, the group began a scattered search, only to find that all the warriors guarding Kuromitsu had been annihilated. Kuro returned to the cave alone after an unsuccessful search. He noticed a mural drawn by a survivor and approached it with a light for a closer look. It vividly depicted Kuromitsu, stained with blood. At that moment, amidst a burst of severe pain, Kuro began to recall fragments of the truth. It was the familiar Kagura forest, but the reality was that a couple had taken the offensive. A group of warriors stood no chance against their blades, resembling lambs to the slaughter, and were quickly annihilated. For unknown reasons, Kuro felt an overwhelming heaviness and his blood churned uncontrollably. However, Kuromitsu smiled, reassuring him that it was only because his body had not yet reached perfection and his healing abilities were lagging. Shocked by the truth, Kuro grabbed the painter's collar and bombarded him with questions, oblivious to the painter's abnormal behavior. Suddenly, endless vines burst forth from the man, quickly overtaking the entire cave. Though powerful, Kuro had no choice but to flee. Meanwhile, Saniwa was captured by the emerging vines, but Kuro arrived in time to cut them down and rescue him. Eventually, everyone escaped to the surface. However, they had no chance to catch their breath, as the Red Emperor's demonic generals were waiting. The bewitchingly faced Kagetsu and the eerily postured Kurumasu had been lying in wait for a long time. With a casual wave, this woman could summon bloodthirsty vines. Not only was she powerful, but she also retained an alluring charisma. Unexpectedly, such a beauty was abruptly grabbed and had her neck violently broken just moments ago. Saniwa confronted Kagetsu in the forest. Surrounded by swirling air currents and dancing cherry blossoms, Saniwa appeared like a goddess of the forest, the very witch of the Kagura forest. However, inexperienced in combat, Saniwa unknowingly allowed Kagetsu's vines to approach her. In an instant, the vines erupted, piercing Saniwa and pinning her to a large tree. Despite her defeat, Saniwa did not submit, which only led to merciless torture from her enemy. Meanwhile, Kurumasu exploited Kuro's feelings for Kuromitsu to hypnotize him. Fortunately, Kuon arrived in time to rescue him. Once awake, Kuro immediately went to aid Saniwa, but tragedy had already struck. On arrival, he found Saniwa nearly dead. Seeing this, Kuro launched an attack without hesitation. However, Kagetsu's powers were greatly enhanced in the forest, making her nearly unstoppable. Even the powerful Kuro had to retreat temporarily. Kagetsu used her senses to search for Kuro, unaware that she was about to face the Reaper's scythe. Elsewhere, Kurumasu, clad in a turtle shell, was chanting strange verses. Opposite him, Karuta and Rai stood dazed, pointing guns at each other. Just as they were about to pull the triggers, Kagetsu's screams spared them, as she lay on the ground severely wounded, bleeding profusely from her abdomen. As Kuro moved to deliver a finishing blow, vines burst from the wound, catching him off guard and binding him tightly. Kagetsu, with a fierce look, aimed to tear Kuro apart. However, at that moment, accompanied by a terrifying presence, the sky dramatically changed. The powerful Kagetsu was suddenly seized and crushed to death like an ant. Kuro stood stunned because the assailant was Kuramitsu, whom he had been desperately searching for. Kuramitsu coldly stated she would wait for him in Red Emperor's city, then vanished into countless black butterflies. After burying Saniwa, the group set off for Red Emperor's city. Despite knowing the journey was likely fatal, they chose to face it bravely. Unbeknownst to them, the Red Emperor's army seemed to have anticipated their arrival. As the drawbridge lowered, several tanks, ready to fire, were in place. At the same time, the cyborg Kurumasu appeared, launching a furious pursuit. Concurrently, the Red Emperor's artillery began firing, testing their driving skills. Eventually, as their vehicle overturned, Kuro and his companions reached the city, with Kurumasu seizing the opportunity to catch up, intent on avenging Kagetsu. Unbeknownst to him, Kuro was not someone he could contend with. In an instant, the cyborg Kurumasu was impaled through the head. Although Kuro reached Red Emperor City, the cost was severe. Karuta died from excessive blood loss, and Kuan temporarily disappeared. Now, only Kuro and Rai remained in the team. With no way back, they had to continue forward. At that moment, Kuro discovered that Kuan, previously missing, was blocking their path. Suddenly, electric current streaked across the ground, and a large device beside them activated. A powerful sonic wave rendered them unable to resist. A holographic image appeared out of nowhere, revealing the Red Emperor Army's mad scientist, Hasegawa. It turned out that everything was his conspiracy. Kuan was his undercover agent planted next to Kuro, and now Kuro had fallen into his trap. The mad plan was about to commence. Kuro fell into the enemy's trap and lost consciousness. When he awoke, he saw images of himself fighting others. At that moment, Hasegawa stepped forward and revealed a shocking secret. According to their research and observation, Kuro's immortal body was not perfect. It needed a body replacement every 100 years to survive, each time erasing all memories. Since learning the truth 20 years ago, a thought had grown louder in Hasegawa's mind. If sacred blood met the perfect body, could it create the ultimate life form? Therefore, he used Kuro's blood to create Kuan, the 48th immortal test subject. It appeared that Kuromitsu was also part of this plan. As Hasegawa reveals the secrets behind Kuro's memories, Kuro's hidden memories gradually awaken. In a year after the destruction of human civilization, Kuro is still fighting against the Red Emperor's army. After the battle ends, he feels heavy and collapses. When he wakes up again, he finds Kuromitsu in the ruins, dragging the body of a dead Kuro. This makes Kuro question what exactly is going on. Following this, Hasegawa drew a vial of Kuro's blood. Before attempting a body swap, he wanted to see what injecting it into a normal human would do. His obsession with life science drove him nearly mad. Just as he was about to inject Rai, Kuro broke free from his restraints and, in anger, punched Hasegawa, sending him flying. This action completely enraged Hasegawa. He then inserted his arm into a machine, which injected him with a massive dose of chemicals, and a dark, evil aura spread from his body. In an instant, Hasegawa transformed into a terrifying monster. Before Kuro could react, the monster was upon him, spraying a purple venom directly onto his face. Kuro immediately covered his eyes and dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by intense pain. At this critical moment, Rai, through a communication device, tried to calm Kuro and became his eyes, guiding him. Under Rai's guidance, they held their own, but Kuro was severely injured. He stumbled and fell into a mechanical pit. Rai, realizing Hasegawa had disappeared, warned Kuro to be careful. Unbeknownst to her, the demonic Hasegawa was already beside her, and she was about to endure endless torment. Hasegawa pinned Rai to the ground with his tentacles, her screams only fueling his manic laughter. He intended to show her what he called hell. However, unbeknownst to him, as he indulged in his cruelty, Kuro approached from behind. Kuro impaled Hasegawa with a steel pipe and, using all his strength, threw him into a crushing machine. As the machine operated, the mad scientist was completely obliterated. As the situation cleared, Kuro realized that Kuromitsu was the mastermind behind everything. Determined to confront his eternal lover and break free from this relentless fate, he prepared for a meeting. But suddenly Rai, already severely injured, was shot in the head by someone. Kuon, Kuro's former companion and his own clone. How twisted can a beautiful woman be? To secure immortality for her husband, she seduced his clone, intending to turn it into the perfect vessel for her husband's spirit. What she did not foresee was that this action would grant the clone emotions, nearly leading to a catastrophic mistake. Just now, Kuon ambushed and killed Rai, then with a twisted smile, slowly approached Kuro, firing shots at a nearby window in a frenzy. Kuro stood frozen, puzzled why his former comrade in arms could be so cold-blooded. Kuon then kicked Rai's body out of the window. Muttering to himself, Kuon revealed that he, an artificial being, had developed feelings and fallen in love with Kuromitsu. Willing to do anything to make her smile, he ultimately realized he was merely a vessel. He questioned whether things might have been different without Kuro. As jealousy turned into hatred, Kuon attacked Kuro with a sword without warning, proving himself a master swordsman despite also being immortal. The substitute looks at the real person in front of them. Seeing Kuro never fight back from beginning to end, Kuon's feelings of inferiority surge like a tide. Surrounded by a palpable aura of endless malice, his hatred visible in crimson, Kuon launched an all-out attack, desperate to kill Kuro right there, driven insane by his unending jealousy. Kuon's attack triggered the elevator, causing it to ascend rapidly out of control. At this moment, Kuon was delirious, believing that killing Kuro would surely make Kuromitsu fall in love with him. Seizing an opportunity, Kuon exploited Kuro's carelessness. He looked down at his rival under the gun and laughed maniacally. However, the next moment, the runaway elevator smashed through the roof, shattering everything around. As the dust settled, Kuro was seen gripping Kuon's arm tightly. Unexpectedly, the deranged Kuon asked whether the 3 black moles on Kuromitsu's waist were just his illusion, as the pleasure he felt that day felt intensely real to him. He wondered if he had truly won Kuromitsu's love. Seeing Kuro's silence, Kuon burst into sick laughter, believing he had finally won. But before he could revel in his victory, Kuro let go of his grip, letting Kuon face the consequences of his madness. Afterwards, Kuro stood amidst the devastation, speechless for a long time. It was time to put an end to it all. He walked through the silent corridor to his final destination, where his enemy, the Red Emperor, the main culprit entwined with him for 1,000 years, was already waiting with music playing. Now, standing before him was the Red Emperor, and it was time to let the world bleed. Just now, after paying a huge price, Kuro finally faced the Red Emperor. Looking at his millennia-old nemesis, Kuro decided to end everything today. However, before he could advance, he was stopped by the Red Emperor's guards. As the two stood off, a guard from the second floor launched a surprise attack, but Kuro easily dodged the deadly strike. Kuro leapt high into the air, and the battle officially began. At that moment, Kuro became a fierce demon, using his long-held sword to reap the lives of the elite guards who, in front of him, seemed no more significant than ants. In just a few moments, The corridor was stained with blood, and this was just the beginning. He was determined to annihilate his enemies completely. Soon, the blood dyed the Great Hall red. Now, only he and the Red Emperor remained. Their 1,000-year feud was about to end today. Both prepared for the final confrontation. Kuro struck first, his cold blade sweeping through the air like a comet, but the opponent was the mighty Red Emperor, who, seizing the moment, shattered Kuro's throat with a staff strike. Kuro fell in pain, but before he could catch his breath, the Red Emperor's follow-up attack arrived, splashing blood and slowing the world around him. Kuro's eyes turned a fierce red as the heavens and earth suddenly changed color. It was Kuro unleashing his awakening power. A millennium-crossing sword thrust hit the Red Emperor right between the eyebrows. The sinister mask shattered with a sound, and the Red Emperor vanished like a phantom. Suddenly, the Great Hall shook violently, and vast amounts of blood surged out. The remaining Red Emperor's army exploded and died. Accompanied by demonic whispers, the blood gradually formed a river. Soon, Red Emperor City began to collapse rapidly, and the river of blood gradually submerged it. The vast steel city instantly turned crimson. On the other side, Kuro did not hesitate and resolutely pushed open the door of doom. Unexpectedly, behind the door was the familiar courtyard where it all began. Through the door, Kuro saw something completely different from 1,000 years ago. Inside the room, the defeated Red Emperor knelt before Kuromitsu. The true identity of the Red Emperor was none other than the traitor, Benkei. Kuromitsu finally asked Benkei why he had betrayed them back then. It turned out that with just one look, Benkei had fallen in love with Kuromitsu. His jealousy over Kuromitsu's union with Kuro nearly drove him mad. Eventually, driven by his inner desires, he became a slave to his lust. When he cut off Kuro's head, a drop of the immortal blood, not yet merged with Kuromitsu, splashed into his mouth. Because of this, he too became immortal. However, without Kuromitsu's love, his immortal body was not complete. Over 1,000 years, his age kept increasing while his body became old and ugly. At this moment, Kuro entered through the door. Seeing Benkei, Kuro no longer harbored any hatred, but everything had to come to an end. The two stood opposite each other in the corridor, surrounded by a murderous aura. Over 1,000 years, Benkei had become a tyrant. The image of killing Kuro flashed through his mind, and a confident smile appeared on his lips. However, he was unaware that what awaited him was a death that had been delayed for 1,000 years. Although Kuro killed Benkei, he still couldn't let go. At the same time, his body felt heavy and his blood churned. Kuromitsu assured him not to worry, explaining that this was because his body wasn't perfect. When Kuro opened his eyes again, he saw Kuromitsu holding his head. All his memories from 1,000 years were restored, and these painful memories had numbed him. He finally understood the agony of immortality and wished to die and end it all. However, he and Kuromitsu were bound by an eternal pact, making him the sole beacon of light in her eternal darkness. Kuromitsu, treasuring this, would not let it end so easily. Kuro, now in a perfect body, began his pursuit anew. As time passed, everything repeated in an endless cycle. However, as memories flooded back, Kuro suddenly opened his eyes. He found himself back in the original forest. Looking at his servant beside him, Kuro thought he had just had a long and dreadful nightmare. Unbeknownst to him, around the forest, skyscrapers stood tall, and everything was controlled by an unseen hand. Perhaps this would be the last time. As the blood-red curtain of 1,000 years slowly falls, this anime sharply dissects the illusion of the eternal question. The bond between Kuro and Kuromitsu has long transcended the shackles of life and death contracts, revealing a deeper metaphor through the erosion of time. The human obsession with eternity is merely the ultimate inquiry into the meaning of existence. When Kuromitsu sheds her demonic shell, and Kuro's armor is soaked in the blood-red moonlight, they finally understand that so-called immortality is not a divine nectar gifted by gods, but a cruel refinement of humanity in the furnace of time. Suddenly, we comprehend the compassionate core of this harsh tale. Perhaps the meaning of life is not to escape the chains of time, but to choose to believe in love and the warmth of pain with each fated encounter.